What's up, Cleftones? This is Darren from CleftoneGrooves.com, and I've got something amazing for you guys today. Well, another weekend is upon us, and I am tired. Let me tell you. The weekend hasn't even started yet, and I'm tired. Is that bad? I don't think so. I've literally just wrapped up 2 weeks worth of traveling all over the place for various activities. One of those activities being the Black Belt Speaker Conference in St. Louis. Now, let me tell you, I took more than half of my studio down to St. Louis, turned Dr. Ruben West's hotel room into a recording studio, and we recorded some interviews while we were down there. So, after all my weeks of traveling, I just got to tell you, sorry for the unprofessional sound quality today, but I've been gone. I haven't had a chance to get my studio all put back together and set up the way I like. So next week, I will be sounding much better than I am now. I know I sound like I'm in a huge room, but that's because I am. I'm sitting in my living room. But the information I have to share with you today, nonetheless, is just as pertinent. And that is that I have decided to do a 4-part training series on how to get professional audio for interviews that you conduct with other people. Now, I know last week I promised I was going to be talking about how to use microphone preamps effectively to get your sound sounding that much better while you're recording at home. But I had such an awesome response and outpouring of appreciation from all the people who attended my breakout session at the Black Belt Speaker Conference about how to use audio to enhance their brand and why it was so critical to your brand to have a good sound quality for every piece of multimedia that you put out. And they had so many questions. It was just amazing. And one of the scenarios that came up was how to have good audio for the interviews that you conduct. And so I thought what I would do is a step-by-step series on how to do just that as far as some of your post-production when it comes to your audio work on your interview. So, like I said, I turned Dr. West's hotel room into a studio where we recorded interviews with all of the people, all of the co-authors that he had on his book that he launched last Saturday. And so in front of us here, I actually have my automation lanes up already for a recording of an interview that Dr. West did with none other than Mr. Corey Briggs from Atlanta. And here it is, Dr. Ruben West is interviewing him, asking him what made him answer the call, which was the theme of this particular Black Belt Speaker Conference. So I'm going to show you in this 4-part series how to take your interviews from this.
I think like most of all of us, we subscribe to that 40-40-40 lifestyle, go to work for 40 hours a week for the next 40 years of our life to hope, wish, and pray we live off of 40% of our income.
To this.
Like most of all of us, we subscribe to that 40-40-40 lifestyle, go to work for 40 hours a week for the next 40 years of our life to hope, wish, and pray we live off of 40% of our income.
So, if you want your audio to sound like that for your interviews, then stay tuned because this series is going to be awesome. And what I'm going to do now is just tell you a little bit about how to go about getting started with this. So as you see, we've already recorded the audio for this. And the first thing that we did while we were recording was we took control of our environment. So I'm going to just tell you one of the best ways that you can get really good recording isn't after you've already recorded something. It isn't during while you're recording it. It's actually before and how you set up your environment that you're going to record in, how you take control. And I actually have a good sound keeping checklist if you're interested that you can go and get from cleftonegrooves.com/checklist. And that is going to help you to take control of your environment for your recordings. Now, once you've taken control of your environment, the next thing that you want to do is make sure that each person in the interview has their own microphone. So in this case, I know you guys weren't there in the hotel room with me and Ruben and all the other co-authors of the book, but 2 people at a time, we had 2 microphones. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that with 2 microphones, you want them to record to 2 separate tracks. So I hope what you're seeing here and what I'm saying is that I isolated each person as much as I possibly could so that I could individually work with just their audio. And that is also a key Again, that's how I set up everything. That's how I prepped everything, because that's going to allow me to do my best work to make sure that this recording sounds as professional as possible. Now, the other thing to keep in mind too, with 2 microphones, or if you have more people with more microphones, then the other thing to keep your sound consistent and sounding really nice is to try to have multiples of the same microphone. So for these interviews that Ruben conducted, I had a Rode NT2A for both Ruben as well as all of his guest speakers and authors that were featured in his book. So let's go ahead and get started with the first thing. So like I mentioned earlier, I've got my volume automation already up here on the screen. And so the very first tip or tool that I'm going to give you in this 4-part series is what you can do that is a very, very simple trick or step that a lot of people don't really think about. Now, again, remember I said you've got 2 microphones. You've got multiple sources of audio here, and they're in the same room together. Well, when your microphones are in the same room, even though you have 2 separate microphones for 2 people, while Ruben was speaking, Corey's microphone was also hearing Ruben across the room. And vice versa, while Corey was speaking, Ruben's microphone was hearing Corey while he was across the room. So what happens is when you leave your microphones open and turned up like that, not only do you get the sound of that individual's microphone, but you get the sound of the other person's microphone picking up that individual from across the room, which gives you that roomy sound, kind of a hollow, just not really great sound quality. So the simple step that we're going to talk about today is volume automation. So again, I've got my volume automation lines in Studio One here. It's as simple as hitting your A button on your keyboard. There you go. It's turned off. Now it's turned back on. One key, the A key. And to make sure you have volume selected, all you have to do is come to this menu here, and under this menu, I have volume for Ruben selected and volume for Corey, as you can see. So we're going to automate the volume to the parts where Ruben isn't speaking. We're going to turn him down. That way, you're not getting the sound of Corey and Ruben's microphone all in your face, along with Corey's microphone while he's speaking. And then the same thing for Corey. When he's not speaking, we'll turn him down. Very, very simple step. So I'm going to add a little breakpoint here. And I'm going to go to the next time here where Ruben is starting to speak again. And notice I added a breakpoint, went right above the line here, and now I've got this bar tool. And I'm just going to click and drag and pull it down. Now, I'm going to stop right there at minus 16.9, a very comfortable area to be in when you're pulling volume down is between minus 15 and 17 decibels. So I stopped at minus 16.9. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is notice this comes like at a 90-degree angle. It just pretty much goes straight up and over, right? Now, I don't have this view fully magnified on these tracks to see where Ruben starts speaking exactly. So, yes, we do see some waveforms here, but that doesn't mean that's where it starts. He might start with a bit of a softer voice before this breakpoint. So what happens is if he does start back here and he's starting to speak, then when he gets here, all of a sudden it's going to be regular volume again. So it's like all of a sudden someone turned his mic on, whereas back here it'll sound like it's off. So you don't want that abrupt change in the volume. So what I usually like to do is just add a gradual increase to the volume automation. So I got rid of that 90-degree angle. Notice I put the breakpoint back here first before deleting that other breakpoint, because if I didn't do that, we'd have some trouble in readjusting that. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's say if I didn't have this breakpoint here, if I delete this now, look at that. It creates a very long fade. So you don't want that, because you're just going to have to play around with that and figure all that stuff out again. So let's go back to the way we had it. Gradual ramp up. Boom. There we go. And the same thing when Ruben stops talking right here. Whoops, I'm moving too fast. When Ruben stops talking, I'm going to ramp it down. But instead, I'm going to ramp it down to right about where Corey starts to speak. And I'll explain why I'm doing that in just a second here. But first I'll tell you, on Corey's track, I want to match about where that breakpoint is and start here, okay? And actually, you know what? I want to start just a little sooner so I don't cut off his speech, but as close to that breakpoint as I possibly can get is key. It's important. Now, coming back to what I was going to explain here, the reason that I ramp it down so slow here is because notice between the time Ruben stops speaking and the time Corey starts speaking, there's a bit of a gap here. If I just ramp it down here, and when I go to ramp up Corey's, if I don't ramp Corey up until just before he starts speaking, now you have two tracks that are totally turned down. Well, what's the problem with that? Less noise, right? True, but think about this. Remember I told you between minus 15 and minus 17. Why don't I turn Ruben all the way down? Well, too much of a good thing is not good, as the old saying goes. And think about this. You have to keep in mind the environment that Ruben and Corey are recording in. While you can just faintly hear some of that environment, if you turn Ruben all the way down while he's not speaking, then you get rid of that environment. And so that is noticeable, but it's not noticeable. What do I mean by that? So your audience, when they listen to your interview, if you turn it completely down, they may not actively notice that, but subconsciously their mind processes that. And so it's kind of jarring for all of a sudden when there's room tone and then there's no room tone at all, just total utter silence. And so the way that you get around that and kind of subconsciously ninja people's brains, as I like to say, is you only drop the volume down where they can still kind of hear that room tone and it's not perfectly silent, right? And so same thing here with Corey's breakpoint that I'm getting ready to drop down. If I drop down both Ruben and Corey where there's a gap between where they're speaking, it kind of gives you that same effect where that room tone is just super low. And then all of a sudden, what happens is when Corey would come in to speak here and I ramp him back up, it's noticeable now that there is the room tone behind Corey. You see what I'm saying? So if you keep that room tone constant, and what I mean by that is this, let me go back to where Corey starts speaking again. So if you keep the room tone kind of constant, if it's always there, it's kind of not noticeable. So I'm holding the shift key so I can get that precise drag on my automation line there. That's why it was going a little bit slower. So here again, I'm going to ramp down right to where Ruben starts talking. Right? So now let me come back here and explain. So if I come back here and ramp up at the same time that Ruben is ramping down, what I'm effectively creating between these two tracks, you've probably heard this term before, what I'm effectively creating is a crossfade. So while that room tone may be going down on Ruben's track, it is coming up at the same power or equally at the same time on Corey's track. So that way the room tone is never really lost. So then again, right there, no one really notices when you're turning things up and when you're turning things down. So it keeps your audience or your listener in the same environment along with who is doing the speaking there. So by the magic of the internet, what I'm going to go ahead and do is take care of all of these tracks here by doing this automation again and just really letting you guys see that. So let me fast forward here and I'll show you once I have a significant portion of this all done what this sounds like. Okay, so I've gotten through about half of this recording and I have done the volume automation, and so I just want to show you really quickly how this sounds. So pay attention again to these what I'll call crossfades of how these fade down and fade up at the same time, and just listen to how seamless it sounds, but also to how it doesn't sound like that roomy sound anymore that you heard in the very beginning of the video when I played that first sample. Notice how it sounds. I'm going to play right here at the transition from Ruben to Corey.
Tell us about that point.
I think like most of all of us, we subscribe to that 40-40-40 lifestyle, go to work for 40 hours a week for the next 40 years of our life to hope, wish, and pray we live off of 40% of our income.
Yeah.
But I had a young lady looking at me, and I'm telling her to be everything she can be and live her best life. So it was more to be done if I was going to set the best example for my daughter.
Exactly. Wow.
So you can start to see that this is really coming together. All I've done here is volume automation. I haven't done anything yet with EQ or compression on the sounds of these gentlemen's voices, but that's going to be in the second part next week, is where, yes, I will add EQ and I'm going to add some compression and show you how to really bring out the natural characteristics and nuances of each of Ruben's voice and Corey's voice as well to make it sound nice and natural. Now, before I go, I also want to let you guys know about an online training class because the response was so amazing from the Black Belt Speaker Conference last weekend that so many people, we had these breakout sessions all going on at the same time. So it was really hard for people to kind of see and benefit from everything because, they kind of had to pick and choose. And so some people didn't get to hear my breakout session. Some people didn't get to hear another person's breakout session, powerful speaker by the name of Felicia Shaw. And so we've decided to put on this online training class next month, May 20th. And also, because the response has been so great, we've put on a second class on June 6th. So if you're interested in that, let me know. The first 5 people that sign up get in for a special discount. But again, shoot me a message on Facebook. Follow me on Facebook here at facebook.com/cleftonegrooves. And this training is going to be the information that I shared at the Black Belt Speaker Conference, as well as the awesome information that Felicia shared on how to interview or be interviewed like a boss. So you definitely don't want to miss that. First 5 seats, $75. And then after that, it goes up. But again, it is information that is definitely worth the investment. So I'm going to tell you guys to hurry up and get that before it's gone. But anyway, here's to getting better audio at home. Stay tuned for next week's installment of this series, this little mini series within a series of how I'm going to add EQ and compression. And you guys have an awesome weekend.